AIKenya podcast, presented by Microsoft.
You talk about the challenges you're trying to overcome now in the technology side.
In technology side, we have two big challenges. One of them is policies, and the other one is data.
Okay.
So when it comes to data, there is Tanzania as a whole hasn't yet moved to digital records yet.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of file-based records, and transferring them from like data entry is a very painful process when you have to deal with doctors' handwriting.
Whoa.
Yeah, so
That's intense.
Yeah, I mean, I love doctors, and we are hoping to be able to work together with them. But doctors' handwritings can be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
And so we got a doctor to come in actually and help us do the data entry. But what's funny is that even the doctor couldn't read some of the things. And we ended up discarding some of the records because we can't use them. Other than that, it's training the algorithms takes a lot of time and a lot of resources. So you need to have a powerful computer, or if you're using cloud computing, you can upload your models up there and train them.
So since Dr. Elsa is an application in the medical area, could you talk about how AI is applied in the medical area, Megan?
There are lots of applications for AI in medicine. Many of them are just recently becoming very popular.
Okay.
And AI is being used in a couple of different ways. The first way is in disease diagnosis, so figuring out what kind of diseases someone has. The other one is in radiology and imaging, so being able to look at a bunch of images and figure out what's wrong, right, with that image, or if it's a cancerous image, what kind of cancer is this? Is it malignant or benign? AI is also being used, as a tool to help nurses better care for their patients, and also, which we just recently discovered, it is being used in robots to do surgery, so to better guide doctors or surgeons while they're doing surgery.
Okay.
So that's how it's being used generally.
Mm-hmm.
At Dr. Elsa, we're using AI for disease prediction as well as forecasting of diseases.
And could you tell us, out of all the solutions that exist for such a particular problem, why did it have to be an AI system?
Oh man, that's a good question. There's lots of solutions that could work, but since this is the solution I know how to do, I figured I would play my part. I'm hoping doctors can play their part as well and medical research can advance, and that can keep getting better.
Mm-hmm.
But from artificial intelligence point of view, the computer can capture way more dimensions than the human can.
Mm-hmm.
So in certain cases recently, computers have been outperforming doctors at diagnosing cancer based on X-rays and MRI results.
Mm-hmm.
So the computer can see in more dimensions and wider view than a human being can. It's just how we're built.
Okay.
Yeah.
So while you're training the AI system, or while you're implementing it out in the field, are there any cases where you have some peculiar cases where you're finding out something interesting that you didn't know about?
Yeah.
So let's say the system is sort of informing you of something new that you didn't know about.
Right. So I'll say this with a little asterisk. This is don't quote me. Don't quote me on this. But something really interesting came up is that as we're entering data into the data collection system, we realize that sometimes, so a doctor would see a patient and say age, gender, this symptoms, this.
Yeah.
Then they would write their differential diagnosis. This is what they think the patient has.
Mm-hmm.
So what would happen is that after tests, the doctor would come back with a final diagnosis. We're finding that as we put in the symptoms before we get to the doctor's thoughts, sometimes the AI beats us to that and suggests what is actually the final one.
Okay.
Yeah. So we are able, in certain cases, we're able to bypass the test phase and just predict the final result without. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And in that particular case, what's the reaction of the doctors? Do they get scared? Like, how did that system do that? And my job is now going to be taken by this system?
If they are, they don't show it because they look pretty calm. Because, again, we're not trying to replace doctors.
Okay.
And that's been hard trying to prove that. But we're trying to work with them and make their jobs a bit manageable.
I think that's also one of the challenges, right? Of course, we talked about that people feel like we are taking doctors' jobs. And something that's really important for us to do, I think, is to prove that this kind of system works, right? So we walk in and we say we have this AI and we took a bunch of data and we put it through our models and this is what we've come up with. And people are right to be skeptical of that a little bit. And so, something that I think is really important for us is to prove the efficacy of our models and of our tool. And we're starting to work on that. We're developing a pilot that we can run in 5 cities in Tanzania just to show that our AI is as effective as a doctor at diagnosing patients.
Could you talk about how regulation comes in? Have you had cases where you sort of clashed with regulation when you're trying to push a solution?
Only a few. So with a technology like AI, there's really unfortunately not a lot of policy yet. Even in the United States and other places where AI is being largely adopted, they're still developing the policy and regulations for it, right? Especially around patient privacy and things like that. And in Tanzania, there aren't a lot of policies for this type of technology. They've recently added in policies about telemedicine, for instance. And so when we first started as Dr. Elsa, actually, we started with a telemedicine system. We wanted patients to be able to communicate with doctors through a mobile phone. Okay. And we set that whole system up and we had it running in the field and things were going great. And then we get phone calls saying, you can't do this. Yeah. You need to shut this down entirely. That it's illegal. It doesn't fall into what, the Ministry of Health believes that telemedicine is. So we've been lucky enough to participate in some conversations about policy with policymakers and how, as a startup and as individuals who are very committed to using this technology, how we can be involved in the conversation, right? We're 2 young people and just trying to develop a solution that we think and we hope works. And policy is often not made by the 2 young people who are doing that. So we're trying to figure out how we can best influence policy.
And just to add on to that, most of the policymakers are of a certain generation. Okay. And that generation, understandably, is skeptical of technology and what technology can. I mean, we've all watched iRobot, right? Yeah. Yeah, so we're all afraid of what technology can bring. Sure. And when it comes to policies, sometimes bad policies are better than no policies, because what happens when there are no policies is that you just get a huge umbrella that says technology. Yeah. And there is AI is clearly a revolution. It's a different type of technology.
Talking about the technology that powers Dr. Elsa, I understand that recently published a paper in Axiv called Synthetic Patient Generation. Yeah. That sounds very cool. Could you tell us what that entails?
The main goal of the paper was to prove to some of the stakeholders that what artificial intelligence can really do. So we decided to try a little experiment and take real patient records, like symptoms and diagnosis and things like that, and put it alongside what our algorithm was able to create and see if the doctor can identify which ones are the fake ones and which ones are the real ones. So we trained the computer on what a typical pneumonia patient looks like in a certain area or things like that. And it learned so well that 80% of doctors were not able to identify the synthetic patients. In fact, more real patients were misclassified than synthetic patients, which is a challenge on its own regard, but that's a bit more advanced.
So the synthetic data that you generate, do you use it in any way to train the model?
We thought about it for a second. Since there is not enough data, why not generate our own data that we can then use? We're obviously shying away from that because the data looks too perfect. Okay. And real life is not perfect.
That perfect.
Yeah, real life is messy. So what we're using to generate the records is a variational autoencoder. Okay. Now, a variational autoencoder is part of the autoencoder neural network family. And how it works, basically, it's a machine that tries to create what you gave it in. So imagine you see a picture of a cat and you're asked to draw a cat. You will draw a cat, yes, but it might not be a perfect replica of the cat you just saw. Yeah. So this is what we're using. So we teach it to learn how the patients typically look like, and then we ask the computer, hey, computer, can you give me a patient with pneumonia? Then it says, well, this patient should be coughing for maybe a couple of days. This patient should be having difficulty breathing. If they did labs, their CBC, their red blood cell count will be this, their white blood cells count will be this, and all of this information. So we put that, we mix it into a hat, and the doctor has to identify which ones are synthetic and which ones are real.
Wow.
Fun, very much fun when the doctors found out the results.
So, could you talk about the challenges that you faced while you're coming up with Dr. Elsa as a system?
One of the big challenges we've had at least in implementing the system, not regarding the technology, is the fact that AI is something that's really confusing to people still, and many people tend to just back away, right? When they hear that word, they tend to kind of feel like, we don't need to be implementing this type of technology. We don't even know what this is. Why would we be using that? So it causes some pushback, which is really challenging for us in terms of implementation.
Okay.
I remember there's been more than one time that we've walked into an office, like a health officer, in a region or a district, and they've just kind of kicked us out because they've claimed that we're taking their doctors' jobs, which, we understand the fear and the kind of uncertainty around AI, but what we're really hoping to do is have AI be utilized as a tool to actually help doctors or healthcare workers, right, do their job and do it better.
Sort of complementing their skills.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand that you are an AI startup,
Yes.
and you've been doing this for about a year now.
Yes.
Over a year.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for other startups that are trying to get into this space?
It's frustrating. Don't give up.
Yeah.
But on a serious note, try and get as much data as you can, and try and get a lot of supporters. One thing we realized, a really vital point in our journey, is when we found someone in power who actually believed in what we're doing, someone in the Ministry of Health. That turned everything around, because we suddenly stopped being kicked out of hospitals for trying to take jobs.
Yeah.
We suddenly started getting audiences with the people we need, because we just name drop everywhere we go. So find someone who believes in you and work with them.
So I think that's all the time we have today. I'd ask if you have any closing remarks for our audience. Any last words? Yeah, I'm trying to grow my Twitter follower base, so if you can follow me, please. I am racing with this girl here, so I follow me first and then her. But Twitter, I'm at 3210JR, and everywhere else. Yeah.
Also, if you'd like to find out more about Dr. Elsa or Inspired Ideas, you can go to our website, inspiredIdeas.io, or follow us on Twitter, Dr._Elsa.
Yeah.
And just to add one more thing, I know this is the listeners are in one way or the other involved in AI.
Yeah.
It's not as hard as it's. I mean, it's some parts of it are really complicated, but getting the barrier to entry is not as high as you might think looking in from the outside.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's lots of library. The community, especially in Kenya, the community is really beautiful.
Really
everybody's supportive. Just get in there and you realize it's super fun and super easy for the beginning part. And then it gets hard. But you'll be ready by the time it gets hard. Yeah.
Okay, so there you have it from Ali Salim Jr. Get into it. It's easy at the beginning, but it gets hard at the
Later,
end. So take heart, have heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it for this episode. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.
The AIKenya podcast, presented by Microsoft.